The research station sat on a quiet hill far away from the busy parts of the city. Most people didn't even know it existed. It wasn't a famous place, and it didn't have advanced equipment. It wasn't the kind of place where breakthroughs usually happened. It was small, old, and always short on funding, but the few people who worked there cared about their work. They stayed because they loved the sky, the silence, and the strange comfort that came from searching for something no one else believed was out there. One evening, just after sunset, the air inside the control room felt unusually still. A single desk lamp glowed in the corner, casting soft light on the equipment. The monitors hummed softly. At that moment, only one researcher remained in the room. He often stayed late, partly because he preferred the quiet, and partly because he felt more focused when the world outside went dark. He stared at the screen in front of him. The waves of static looked normal, the kind that came every night, random, messy, nothing to think about. But then something unusual appeared. A bright spike flashed in the middle of the graph. At first, he assumed it was a glitch. The station's equipment was old. Spikes like that happened sometimes when weather changed or when an old wire acted up. But then another spike appeared. And then another. All evenly spaced. All shaped the same way. He frowned and leaned closer. He tapped a few keys, zooming in on the pattern. The spikes were too clean, too sharp, too perfectly repeated. It felt intentional, almost like someone tapping a rhythm on a door. He sat back in his chair. It couldn't be what he was thinking. Signals like this didn't just appear out of nowhere. People spent their entire lives searching and never found anything even half this clear. He hesitated before calling anyone, unsure if he wanted to be told. It was nothing. But curiosity pushed him. He stood up, walked down the hallway, and found two colleagues preparing to leave. He told them he noticed something strange and asked them to take a look before going home. They agreed, mostly out of habit. He was always finding weird little signals that meant nothing. When they returned to the control room, he replayed the data. They watched quietly as the pattern repeated across the screen. The second researcher crossed his arms and leaned forward, squinting. The third sat down, eyes widening slightly. "What do you think?" The first one asked softly. "It's too clean to be interference," the second replied. The third nodded. "It has structure. It's not noise." They ran a few simple checks. No weather anomalies. No nearby military activity. No equipment failure alerts. Everything seemed normal, except for the signal. The second researcher tried to dismiss it at first. He said it could be a satellite reflecting some kind of interference. But when they checked satellite positions, none matched. Still, none of them felt ready to admit it might be something meaningful. It was easier to believe they were missing something simple. The pattern repeated again. This time longer, as if the signal were stretching itself, revealing more of its shape. They recorded everything. They ran it through software to analyze the structure. The more they studied it, the more the room filled with silent tension. No one wanted to jump to conclusions, but none of them could deny the possibility forming quietly in their minds. What if this was not a mistake? What if someone somewhere was sending this deliberately? The third researcher finally said what the others were afraid to. "It almost looks like a distress call." The room fell quiet. The first researcher shook his head. "Distress? From where? No one is out there." But the words didn't feel convincing, even as he said them. They decided to step away for a moment and clear their minds. They walked outside the station and stood beneath the open sky. The stars above looked calm, silent, unchanging, just tiny lights scattered across a dark blanket. It was impossible to imagine anything calling out from that distance. And yet the signal was real. It was sitting inside their computer, waiting for them to figure it out. After a few minutes, they went back inside. They ran the signal again. They slowed it down, sped it up, filtered it, and broke it into segments. The pattern always came back the same: uniform, structured, intentional. One of them suggested reporting the finding to a larger research center. The others hesitated. If they were wrong, they risked embarrassment and possibly losing what little funding they had. The place already had a reputation for chasing strange things. A false alarm could shut them down, but doing nothing felt worse. The first researcher wasn't sure if he was afraid of being wrong or afraid of being right. He kept imagining what it would mean if the signal was real, if it came from somewhere deep in the galaxy. It wasn't a comfortable thought. The universe was already big enough, too big for human imagination to hold. The idea of someone else being out there made it feel even more overwhelming. They decided to wait a little longer before reporting anything. They wanted more data, something solid, something they could prove was not an error. Hours passed. The night grew colder. The coffee pot emptied. The screens kept glowing, and the researchers kept staring. Then the signal suddenly repeated in a longer sequence, like a sentence instead of a word. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was structured, and it echoed through every piece of equipment they had. They recorded the new wave carefully, knowing this part mattered more than anything else. When they listened to the raw audio version, the room filled with a low, pulsing sound. It was eerie, but not frightening. It felt like something trying to push through a great distance, like a voice speaking through layers of storm and stone. The second researcher adjusted the frequencies, clearing out static until the pattern became clearer. The first researcher whispered, "It really sounds like a call for help." The third nodded. Someone or something sent this. They continued studying it until the sky outside turned light again. By morning, all three of them felt tired but unable to leave. The signal still sat on the screen, repeating steadily, waiting for someone to understand it. They all knew they couldn't keep this to themselves forever. The world needed to know. But fear held them back. Not fear of danger, but fear of disbelief. People might call them dreamers, fools, attention seekers. They might say the team misread the data. They might say the signal was nothing but space noise. But deep down, none of the researchers believed that anymore. The first researcher suggested sending the data to a small online group of radio experts he trusted. It wasn't an official step, but it would give them more eyes on the signal. The others agreed reluctantly. They uploaded a portion of the recording anonymously and asked if anyone else could confirm it. They didn't expect much. Most posts like that were ignored, but within hours, replies started coming in. A radio hobbyist from another city said he picked up something similar the previous night, but thought his equipment was malfunctioning. A student from a different country claimed she had recorded a strange pattern that matched the first half of the signal. A small group of space enthusiasts began comparing notes. Someone created a basic analysis and uploaded it. Someone else found a repeating translation pattern. Another pointed out the strange way the signal looped. The researchers watched in stunned silence as complete. Strangers began solving pieces of the puzzle. And then the moment arrived. The message appeared to contain a repeated phrase. No one could translate it perfectly, but one simple interpretation kept appearing in people's attempts. "We are fading." The words hit the researchers harder than they expected. The signal wasn't just a beacon. It was a plea, a warning, a voice from somewhere no human had ever seen. They looked at each other, fully aware their lives had just changed. Something was reaching across the galaxy, calling out to anyone who might listen. And somehow, in a quiet research station no one cared about, they were the ones who heard it first. They didn't know what the signal meant or who sent it. They didn't know if anyone was still out there. But they did know one thing. This was not a mistake, and whatever they had discovered was only the beginning. The news of the strange signal spread quietly at first, almost like a whisper passing through small corners of the internet. The research station had sent only a small portion of the recording to an online group of radio enthusiasts. They had expected little attention, maybe a few curious replies. What they didn't expect was how fast the signal would grow in interest. Amateur radio operators across the globe began reporting similar patterns. The signal seemed faint in some places, clearer in others, but it was there, repeating its mysterious rhythm like a heartbeat of the stars. People who had spent years tinkering with radios and satellites, who often thought no one else cared about their work, suddenly felt part of something bigger. Small forums filled with posts, theories, and debates. Every post included recordings, screenshots, and graphs. Everyone was trying to see what the others had seen. There were mistakes, of course, false positives, corrupted files, but the core of the signal remained consistent. Every new observation confirmed what the first research station had heard. It was real, and it was extraordinary. Meanwhile, the researchers at the station felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety. On one hand, it was thrilling to see others confirm the signal. It meant they were not imagining it. On the other hand, the moment brought a wave of responsibility. They had discovered something no human had understood before, and now they were part of the story that could change everything. One of them suggested they try decoding it further. They had only listened to the raw pulses, the repeating waves. What if there was more hidden inside? They pulled up all the recordings from both their own station and the amateurs who had sent them files. For hours, they ran the sequences through filters, adjusting frequencies, isolating patterns, and looking for anything that resembled communication. As the day passed, the team noticed something remarkable. The signal seemed to carry small bursts of repeated information, patterns that almost looked like language, though it was unlike any human language. The pulses changed rhythm, slowed, then sped up. They weren't random. They were structured. At times, they almost sounded like syllables, though the researchers had no idea how to interpret them. The more they studied, the more they realized the signal had purpose. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't background noise or interference. Someone or something had sent it with intention. And within that intention was a sense of urgency. Every repetition, every pause, seemed to be part of a pattern they couldn't yet understand. Meanwhile, online, the signal began to attract the attention of professional astronomers. Small universities, observatories, and even independent scientists started checking their own equipment. Many were skeptical, thinking it might be interference from satellites or weather phenomena. Yet, the more data they collected, the harder it became to ignore the truth. Patterns aligned. The signals matched in frequency and timing. Different continents recorded the same pulse, almost simultaneously. One team managed to isolate the signal and slow it down significantly. When they did, a simple phrase seemed to appear repeatedly in the waveform. The interpretation wasn't perfect. None of them could be certain, but it was consistent with the early translations shared by the online group. The phrase sounded like a plea. "We are fading." The words shook everyone who saw them. Not in a sudden, shocking way, but quietly, deeply, like realizing a long-lost friend was trying to reach out. Scientists and enthusiasts alike felt the weight of the moment. If the signal was real, it wasn't just an experiment, a scientific anomaly, or a curious quirk of space. It was someone or something trying to be heard. The news reached a few small media outlets. At first, the articles were short and careful. They didn't claim to know what the signal meant. They merely reported that strange transmissions were being detected and studied. But even that was enough to ignite curiosity worldwide. Social media posts speculated wildly, as humans are prone to do when faced with the unknown. Some joked about aliens, others suggested government conspiracies, while a few expressed fear. Yet amid the chatter, serious discussion began to form. Governments quietly took notice. National space agencies, which normally avoided rumors, started monitoring the signal. They didn't make announcements, but internal teams analyzed the data. Some debated whether the public should be told. The possibility that the signal came from intelligent life, whether alive or long gone, was enough to make the situation unprecedented. Back at the station, the researchers wrestled with their own emotions. They were scientists, trained to be careful and skeptical, yet they couldn't help feeling awe. The night sky that once seemed endless and impersonal now felt alive, aware, and urgent. Every twinkle of a distant star made them wonder if it might be the source. Every quiet pause in their routine made the signal echo louder in their minds. Sleep became difficult. During the night, one of them would wake, convinced they could hear the pulses faintly in their dreams. Sometimes the rhythm haunted them, echoing as if calling them to understand. Coffee became a constant companion, a weak comfort against the excitement and anxiety that filled the small control room. They began mapping the timing of the pulses, trying to figure out if it came from a single point or if it moved. Each calculation confirmed it originated from deep space, far beyond the solar system, but they couldn't yet pinpoint an exact location. The distance didn't make the signal less real, it made it more incredible. If someone or something sent this message, it had traveled light years, carrying a fragment of existence across time and space, only to reach a small station on Earth. More volunteers joined the online efforts. People with expertise in mathematics, linguistics, and engineering offered their help. They shared algorithms, plotted graphs, and tested translations. Each day, the researchers woke to new findings, new confirmations, and sometimes new confusion. Every discovery opened more questions. How old was the signal? Who had sent it? Were they alive when they sent it? Had they survived the journey of their own message? Despite the growing complexity, one thing became clear. The signal was more than random. It was a voice, a plea, something reaching across the void, asking for attention. Humanity had never heard anything like it before. The researchers realized that reporting it, beyond the small community, was inevitable. They had tried to stay cautious, waiting for more evidence, but with more people confirming the signal and media outlets starting to notice, the story was spreading faster than they could control. Soon, their discovery would no longer belong to a single station or a small group of enthusiasts. It would belong to everyone. They debated how to present it. Scientific journals would demand precise data, careful language, and peer review. But the signal's beauty and urgency could not be fully captured in formal reports. They wanted people to feel it, to understand, even slightly, what it might be like to receive a message from somewhere unimaginably distant, from someone reaching out when all hope seemed lost. Even among themselves, they struggled to describe it. The first researcher compared it to hearing a faint heartbeat in a vast, silent room. The second said it felt like a whisper across a canyon, so wide it could swallow your voice. The third remained quiet, overwhelmed by the mix of wonder and fear. Words seemed inadequate. They decided to continue monitoring and analyzing, documenting every pulse, every pattern, every new observation from around the world. They built a shared timeline, connecting data points from different continents. Slowly, the pieces began to form a picture of something structured, intentional, and alive, or at least alive once. By the end of the week, they had more questions than answers. Could it be life, long gone but leaving a trace? Could it be a natural phenomenon so perfectly timed it mimicked communication? Could it be a warning? And yet, through all the uncertainty, one feeling remained constant. Something beyond human experience had reached out. And anyone had answered. The world was listening now, quietly at first, through hobbyists, scientists, and a few careful journalists. The signal's repetition Its pattern, its desperate tone, created a connection. It was fragile and small, but it existed. And in that connection, humans could feel a shared understanding that stretched across the void. They had never experienced anything like this before, and they would never forget the moment when a faint pulse from the darkness made the earth stop, if only for a heartbeat, and pay attention. By the time the second week arrived, what had started as a single station's anomaly became a global effort. People tracked the signal from homes, small labs, and observatories. Universities assigned students to analyze it. International forums discussed translations. No one claimed to fully understand it yet, but everyone agreed on one point. It was real, and it mattered. The researchers finally allowed themselves a small sense of hope. Perhaps someone, somewhere, had reached out not just for help, but for understanding. Perhaps, in some strange way, humans had become the ones listening when it mattered most. And deep down, they all knew this was only the beginning. The signal had grown from a strange anomaly to a global fascination. Amateur radio enthusiasts, scientists, students, and hobbyists all worked together, trying to make sense of it. The researchers at the small station had never imagined their quiet work would spark such attention, but they were now at the center of something extraordinary. Every day brought new messages, graphs, calculations, and theories. It felt like the world was moving in slow motion, all focused on the same impossible problem. One morning, the first researcher received an email from a well-known observatory. They had been monitoring deep space signals for years, and they confirmed the same pattern from their powerful instruments. Unlike the small station's readings, their equipment could track minute details in precise locations. They reported that the signal seemed to come from a single, fixed point far beyond the familiar stars of the Milky Way. The researchers gathered around their monitors, hearts racing. A fixed point? That meant it wasn't drifting. It wasn't random. It had a home somewhere in the galaxy. The idea made the universe feel smaller and heavier at the same time. Suddenly, the tiny pulses they had recorded felt like whispers from a specific place, not just noise floating in empty space. They started running calculations to determine the exact coordinates. With multiple observatories contributing data, they could triangulate the source. Each time they refined the measurements, the possible location became smaller. Their maps displayed distant stars, nebulae, and swirls of gas light years away. Somewhere within that cosmic stretch was the origin of the message. The realization sank in slowly. They were looking at the signal not as an abstract pattern, but as a voice. Someone or something had existed there, had tried to reach out, and had sent this plea across the galaxy. The words repeated in their minds, "We are fading." It was no longer just a message. It was a story waiting to be understood. Meanwhile, online discussions evolved from technical analysis to philosophical debates. People began asking questions no one could answer. Who were they? What caused them to fade? Were they still alive? Could humans even survive to reach them? Some posts suggested the message might be ancient, sent thousands or millions of years ago, and that the senders might no longer exist. Others believed the message could be recent, and the urgency of the plea meant help might still be possible. The researchers tried to focus on the data. They knew that guessing would not help. What they could do was continue analyzing the signal, looking for patterns that might reveal language, culture, or technology. They examined the structure, noticing subtle variations. Some pulses were longer, others shorter. Some repeated faster, as if emphasizing certain points. There were layers within the message, hints that the senders had designed it to be interpreted step by step. For anyone listening carefully enough, after days of work, one of the researchers noticed something that made the room go silent. Within the repeating pulses, there were maps embedded, not maps of Earth, of course, but maps of stars, planetary systems, and possibly the trajectory of the signal itself. It was as if the senders wanted to guide whoever received the message toward understanding where they were, or where they had been. The team stared at the screen in awe. They couldn't say for sure what all the lines meant, but it was undeniably deliberate. Someone had sent this message with care. They had included information, not just emotion. This was intelligence at work, a civilization trying to communicate across impossible distances. The idea of an extinct civilization began to settle in. Perhaps the phrase, "we are fading," wasn't just a cry for help. It was a warning. The signal had survived longer than its creators. Whatever had caused them to fade, the message outlived them. It was both beautiful and terrifying. Humanity was listening to the echoes of a species that might be gone. News of the maps drew attention from larger institutions. Astronomers, linguists, and mathematicians joined the effort. Conferences, virtual meetings, and forums erupted with discussions. Some attempted to overlay the maps with known star systems. Others tried to decode possible measurements, units, and coordinates hidden in the pulses. Every team approached the problem differently, but all were united by curiosity and a shared sense of responsibility. The researchers at the small station often worked late into the night, coordinating with international teams. They no longer felt isolated. Instead, they were part of a network of minds spanning the globe, all focused on the same impossible question. Who had sent this message, and what could it mean? Sleep became secondary. Meals were often skipped. One night, the first researcher realized he hadn't felt hunger or fatigue for hours. All he could focus on were the pulses repeating on the screen. The signal had a rhythm that seemed almost alive. It ebbed and flowed, pulsing through the room like a distant heartbeat. He leaned back and thought about the enormity of it. A voice had traveled across the galaxy. Someone had tried to speak to someone else, somewhere, across unimaginable distances. And humanity had been the first to answer. Amateur scientists continued to contribute critical insights. One hobbyist noticed subtle anomalies in the signal's timing, which suggested that the senders had a system of encoding not just language, but context. Another pointed out sequences that might represent biological information, tiny bursts that could hint at life forms, their shapes, or their structure. Every discovery, even small, added layers to the story embedded in the signal. The researchers debated what it all meant. Could this message contain information about the civilization's culture, science, or history? Could it be a warning, a guide, or a final record of their existence? Every theory seemed plausible and impossible at the same time. Meanwhile, fear began to creep in. The thought that the senders might have perished caused unease. What had caused their fading? Disease, environmental collapse, war, or something else? And if it was something dangerous, could it exist elsewhere in the galaxy? These questions weighed heavily on the team. They had started with excitement, then curiosity, and now they were confronting the unknown consequences of understanding. Despite the fear, the excitement remained stronger. Humanity had, for the first time, received a voice from a distant star system, something clearly intelligent. It was proof that life, or something like it, had existed beyond Earth. The sheer improbability of it made every discovery feel miraculous. The researchers realized they needed to collaborate more openly. They created shared online databases, inviting anyone with relevant expertise to contribute. People began simulating the signal, testing translations, and predicting what it might contain next. International teams exchanged ideas in real time, building a network of collaboration unprecedented in history. As the weeks passed, more patterns emerged. The pulse sequences weren't random. They contained repetitions that suggested syntax or a structure similar to grammar. There were sections that repeated frequently, possibly emphasizing critical information. Other sections seemed like complex explanations, perhaps of concepts the researchers didn't yet understand. The message was layered, intricate, and astonishingly advanced. At night, the first researcher often stared at the sky, wondering if the stars above hid the home of the signal's creators. Each constellation took on a new meaning. Each distant light seemed alive with possibility. He imagined the civilization, sending its message with hope, fear, and determination. Even if they were gone now, their message remained a testament to their intelligence and perseverance. The signal had become more than a puzzle. It had become a connection. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, in a symbolic sense. They had touched something beyond their world, even if only through pulses and patterns. And in that touch, they felt responsibility. Responsibility to understand, to interpret, and perhaps to carry forward the legacy of the senders. The phrase, "we are fading," echoed in the researchers' minds constantly. It was simple, yet profound. It was not just a warning, it was a statement of existence, of fragility, and of hope that someone somewhere might respond. Humanity had responded, in part, by listening. But the question remained, what next? Could humans do more? Should they do more? Could understanding the message prevent the same fate from happening to their own world? The small station, once quiet and forgotten, now buzzed with life, ideas, and shared purpose. People around the globe had joined them in deciphering a story written in the stars. And as they continued to analyze the signal, one thought became clear. This was more than science. This was a bridge across time and space. A voice from a civilization that had reached across the unimaginable distance of the galaxy to speak to another. And humanity had answered. The discovery of the signal had moved beyond curiosity. Humanity was now faced with a choice, to ignore it or to respond. At first, the small research station and its network of amateur scientists had done what they could, listening, recording, decoding, and sharing insights. But as the signal's patterns became clearer, the possibility of sending a reply began to take hold. The researchers at the station were not the kind to make grand plans lightly. They understood the risks and the impossibility of the task. Yet the idea of remaining silent felt wrong. If a civilization or whatever had sent the signal was out there, even if long gone, they deserved acknowledgement. There was a need to show that someone had heard their voice. Word of the signal reached larger scientific institutions and national space agencies. Initially, officials were cautious. Any public statement could cause panic or be dismissed as science fiction. But behind closed doors, experts argued passionately. They debated whether humanity had a responsibility to respond. Some were hesitant, fearing that sending a reply could expose Earth to unknown dangers. Others argued that this was an opportunity unlike any other in history, a chance to communicate across the stars, to show empathy and intelligence. A coalition of scientists, engineers, and linguists formed quietly, meeting in video conferences across continents. Time zones became irrelevant. The project moved faster than any traditional research effort. Plans were drafted, simulations run, and every possible medium of communication considered. They had to find a way to send a message that could travel light years and be understood by beings completely alien to human experience. The first challenge was the message itself. What could they say that would be meaningful? Words would likely be useless. Symbols might be misinterpreted. Numbers, physics, mathematics, and basic principles of the universe seemed safer. The coalition decided to create a message that combined universal truths with humanity's voice. Simple patterns, prime numbers, and geometric shapes would demonstrate intelligence. Images representing life on Earth, plants, animals, humans, would illustrate the diversity of life. Sounds of Earth, such as the ocean, wind, and heartbeat, were considered for inclusion, capturing the essence of the planet's living pulse. The researchers at the small station were central to the process. They had spent weeks analyzing the signal, understanding its structure, and noting its rhythm. The coalition believed the senders had used a pattern deliberately designed for interpretation. If humanity's reply ignored this structure, it might be lost or misunderstood. The team worked late nights, adjusting frequencies, encoding images into pulses, and ensuring that the message aligned with principles that could survive the vast distances of space. Meanwhile, the emotional weight of the project pressed on everyone involved. For the first time, humans were reaching out to another intelligent life form, not through imagination, but through action. Every decision carried gravity. Was the message polite, respectful, and clear enough? Did it convey curiosity without arrogance? Could it possibly carry empathy across light years? These questions sparked debates as fierce as any scientific argument. The technical challenges were enormous. The message had to be powerful enough to leave Earth and survive interference from cosmic radiation, solar winds, and countless unknown obstacles. Engineers designed transmitters far stronger than anything currently in regular use. They calculated the energy needed for the signal to reach its target, balancing power requirements, timing, and precision. Every calculation had to be exact, or the message could drift off into space. Lost forever. The first researcher from the small station often stayed alone in the control room, watching simulations of the message traveling through space. He imagined the path it would take, past stars and planets, through nebulae and black holes, until it reached the point where the original signal had come from. He pictured the unknown beings receiving it, if they still existed, deciphering the pulses, and understanding that someone had heard them. The thought filled him with awe and also fear. Could they understand it? Could they react? Would they even exist when the message arrived? Weeks turned into months as the coalition worked tirelessly. Progress was slow but steady. Each stage of the message was tested, broken, and rebuilt. Images were converted into signals, sounds transformed into patterns, and information encoded in a way that could survive the journey. Meetings sometimes lasted hours, sometimes days, with disagreements about the content, format, and even tone of the message. It was more than technology. It was diplomacy with an unknown species. Outside the scientific circles, the world was becoming aware. Small news reports hinted at unusual activity in space agencies. Amateur scientists and hobbyists speculated about what might be happening. Social media discussions surged, with people imagining who or what could have sent the original signal. Some feared alien contact. Others dreamed of friendship. The public's curiosity, though tentative, added pressure to the coalition. The eyes of the world seemed to be waiting for an answer. Finally, after months of planning, the message was ready. It was not a simple text, not a single pulse, but a carefully constructed sequence of patterns, sounds, and images. It began with basic mathematics, prime numbers, and geometric forms. These were universal, designed to demonstrate intelligence. Following this, the message included representations of life on Earth plants, animals, humans, and a soundscape capturing the essence of the planet: wind, rain, ocean waves, and heartbeat. It ended with a simple greeting, a demonstration that someone had listened and responded. The day of transmission arrived. The small station and the coalition worked in unison. Operators monitored the equipment, checked frequencies, and confirmed alignment with a distant point in space. The transmitters powered up, and the pulse sequences began to leave Earth, traveling toward the source of the original signal dot as the message departed. The first researcher felt a mixture of pride, fear, and wonder. Humanity had reached out across the galaxy. It was a moment that transcended science, politics, and culture. For once, people from every part of the world had collaborated not for conflict or competition, but for understanding. After the transmission, the room fell silent. Everyone waited, knowing the message would take years, perhaps centuries, to reach its destination. Yet the act itself was important. Humanity had responded. They had acknowledged the signal. They had shown that someone had been listening. The researchers reflected on the journey that brought them here. What began as a faint signal in a small station had become a global endeavor. It had brought people together, inspired wonder, and demanded the very best of human intelligence, patience, and empathy. The pulse of the message echoed in their minds, a reminder of the fragility and beauty of life in the universe. Even after the transmission, questions remained. Would the message be received? Could it be understood? Would it have consequences humans could predict? The unknown weighed heavily, but the team knew that waiting silently had never been an option. Humanity had taken a step into the larger universe, reaching for understanding and proving that even in the vastness of space, voices could be heard. The first researcher looked at the sky that night, imagining the long journey of the message. He pictured the distant stars, the systems, the possible beings waiting, or perhaps gone somewhere, far beyond human sight. He felt hope, not certainty. He knew that whatever happened next, humanity had made contact, and that alone was extraordinary. The signal had begun as a plea for help, fragile and distant. Humanity's reply was not a rescue mission, not a promise, but a recognition. Someone had listened. Someone had responded. And in the silence that followed, the stars seemed a little closer, the universe a little smaller, and the human heart a little larger. The world would continue to watch, debate, and speculate. Scientists would continue refining the message, and new generations would ponder what it meant. But for the researchers at the small station, the coalition, and all who had contributed, the act of sending the reply was a milestone. Humanity had stretched out a hand into the darkness and reached across light years to touch something beyond themselves. In the quiet after the transmission. As the control rooms emptied and the operators went home, the first researcher stayed behind. He watched the faint glow of the monitors and thought about the journey ahead, not for the message itself, which would take years to reach its destination, but for the understanding it had created on Earth. Humanity had changed. Curiosity, collaboration, and courage had brought them here, and whatever awaited at the other end of the galaxy, they had already taken the first step toward connection. Months had passed since humanity had sent its reply into the depths of space. The message, carrying sounds, images, and patterns, was now drifting across light years, traveling toward the distant point where the original signal had originated. On Earth, life continued as usual for most people, but for those involved in the discovery and transmission, every day carried a quiet tension. No one could say if the reply would ever be received. It might take decades, centuries, or longer. It might never be received at all. The small research station remained at the center of attention. Scientists and hobbyists continued to monitor space, not for the original signal, but for any signs of response. With the vast distances involved, even a faint echo would take time to reach Earth. Still, no one wanted to stop listening. Every monitor, every radar, every telescope could hold the first sign of something extraordinary. Then, late one night, the first unusual anomaly appeared. A distant star system began to show patterns of light that didn't match natural activity. The research team noticed it first, a subtle flicker that repeated in an oddly consistent rhythm. At first, they thought it was a technical fault or a reflection of something closer, but the pattern persisted. It was steady, deliberate, and unlike anything they had seen before. The team ran every test, checked every piece of equipment, and analyzed the readings from multiple sources. The anomaly remained. Slowly, it became clear. This was not random. It was a response. Not a voice in words, not a simple signal, but something much more complex. The light pulses repeated with precision, echoing patterns that were strangely familiar. They matched the structure of humanity's own message. The room filled with a mixture of excitement, disbelief, and fear. The researchers realized that the distant civilization, or at least the system that had sent the original signal, was responding in some form. Yet it wasn't a living voice. The pattern suggested something automated, a system left behind by a civilization that had long since faded. It was like a machine waiting for someone to answer, programmed to respond when its call was finally heard. For days, the team watched and recorded. They began to notice layers within the light patterns, repetitions that hinted at intelligence. Some sequences resembled the structure of the original signal, almost as if it were echoing back what had been sent. Others were entirely new, introducing sequences that the team had never observed before. Every repetition felt like a message, even if it could not yet be fully understood. Word of the discovery spread quietly at first, through scientific forums and private communications. The public had not been informed, but the researchers knew that this could become the most significant discovery in human history. Humanity had not only listened, it had been acknowledged. Even if the response came from a system left behind, even if the original senders were gone, the fact that someone or something had waited and answered was astounding. International observatories began to focus their instruments on the same area. Scientists compared the patterns, looking for consistency. Each team found the same repeating sequences, confirming that the anomaly was real. No one could deny it. The response was there, deliberate, structured, and alive with intent. It was not alive in the sense of breathing or moving, but it carried the intelligence of its creators. The researchers at the small station spent long nights decoding what they could. They noticed that certain sequences seemed to reference the same principles used in humanity's reply mathematics, patterns, and shapes that were almost universal. Other sequences were more complex, hinting at a type of information they could not yet translate. It was like opening a book written in a language no one had seen before. They could not read all of it, but they could sense its meaning. The discovery caused debates among the team. Was this a warning? A continuation of the plea? Or simply a record designed to communicate for eternity? The more they analyzed, the more they realized that the civilization had anticipated its own fading. They had created a system to respond automatically when their original signal was detected. It was a message left for anyone who could hear it, a final attempt to communicate, even if the senders no longer existed. Amateur scientists contributed valuable insights. Some noticed subtle anomalies in the sequences that suggested biological information. Others speculated that the patterns could contain maps of the system, trajectories of planets, or even fragments of technology. Every discovery added pieces to the puzzle, but also revealed the vastness of what they did not yet understand. The emotional impact on the researchers was profound. They felt awe, wonder, and a quiet sadness. The civilization that had sent the original plea might be gone, yet its legacy survived. Its last act had been to reach out, hoping that someone, somewhere would listen. Humanity had answered, and in doing so had been acknowledged. But the recognition was bittersweet. The beings who had sent the call might never be alive to hear the reply, to share in the understanding, or to experience connection. Scientists began calling the phenomenon the automated response, a system left behind by a civilization that had anticipated the limits of its own existence. It was like a time capsule, waiting for someone to unlock its meaning. Yet the mystery remained. Why had they chosen to include this system? What did they hope would come from it? Was it a message of hope, of warning, or simply a record of existence? Even as the researchers debated these questions, the world outside continued unaware. Social media discussions speculated about strange light patterns and signals from space, but the magnitude of what had been discovered was too complex to explain in headlines. Only those who were directly involved understood the enormity. humanity had touched a civilization that had left behind a voice across the galaxy. The first researcher often stayed late, staring at the repeating pulses on the monitor. He imagined the civilization that had created them, sending signals across the void, knowing that no one might ever receive them. Yet they had done so anyway. There was a quiet dignity in that, a proof that intelligence and hope could persist even in the face of inevitable fading. As days passed, the automated response continued. It repeated patterns, echoed sequences, and occasionally introduced variations that suggested additional layers of information. Each night, the researchers would sit in silence, watching the pulses, listening to the rhythm of a civilization's final voice. The experience was almost meditative, yet it carried an undercurrent of urgency. The original plea had been a cry for help. This response was something more. It was a record, a warning, and a connection all at once. The team began sharing their findings with international collaborators. Together, they attempted to interpret the sequences, to understand the civilization's history, technology, and perhaps the cause of its fading. Every discovery led to new questions, but the more they studied, the clearer one fact became. The civilization had thought deeply about communication and legacy. They had anticipated the possibility of extinction and had designed a system to reach beyond it. The emotional weight of this realization was immense. The researchers were witnessing a species thinking across time and space, preparing for a moment when they might no longer exist. Humanity had unintentionally become part of that plan, answering the call that had traveled light years. It was both humbling and inspiring. Some nights, the first researcher would step outside the station, looking at the stars with a new perspective. Each point of light seemed alive with possibility. Somewhere out there, in the depths of the galaxy, was the system that had sent the original plea. Its response now traveled back, a silent conversation between the creators and the listeners. The universe, once vast and impersonal, now felt like a living network of voices, echoes, and connections. The automated response also changed the way humanity thought about life beyond Earth. Scientists and philosophers debated the implications. If a civilization could leave behind such a system, what other forms of intelligence might exist or have existed? Could humans, too, create messages that would survive across centuries, even if the civilization itself faded? The signal had become more than data. It had become a mirror for humanity's curiosity, ingenuity, and empathy. For the researchers at the station, each pulse, each pattern, carried a story. The faint rhythms that had once been mysterious now felt like a dialogue across the cosmos. They could not fully understand the words, but they could feel the intent, the care, and the hope embedded within. Humanity had been listened to. Humanity had been acknowledged. The automated response reminded them that communication could outlast civilizations. That hope could persist beyond the limits of existence. It was a lesson in humility, wonder, and responsibility. The first researcher often thought about what it meant for the future. Could humanity also send messages that might reach across time, leaving traces of its existence for others to find? Could they learn from the fading civilization and ensure their own survival? The months continued, and the automated response became a steady presence in the researchers' lives. They logged each variation, shared every observation, and speculated endlessly. Each pulse was a reminder that intelligence, once awakened, could persist in remarkable ways. Even in silence, even in absence, voices could endure, and so humanity listened. With awe, with respect, and with an understanding that stretched beyond words. The original plea had sparked a journey, and the automated response had transformed it into a connection that spanned light years. For the researchers, for the coalition, and for the countless enthusiasts who had contributed, the experience was transformative. They had reached across the galaxy, and now they had been reached in return. The automated response continued to pulse across space, sending back patterns and sequences that the researchers struggled to interpret. Every new variation felt like a revelation. Yet beneath the excitement, a quiet tension grew. Something in the messages suggested urgency, not just reflection. The original plea, "We are fading," had been desperate. Now, the subtle variations in the response hinted at a danger that the fading civilization had faced, something more than time, more than natural decay. The small research station and its coalition of global scientists worked tirelessly. They tried to extract meaning from the patterns, cross-referencing every pulse, every rhythm, every repetition. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The signals were not just calls for help or records of existence. They were warnings. Certain sequences repeated in ways that suggested movement, threat, and survival strategies. There were patterns that indicated fleeing, avoidance, and even destruction, though the exact meaning remained unclear. The first researcher stared at the screens late into the night, heart pounding. For weeks, he had imagined hope and wonder, the excitement of contact. Now fear had entered the room. Something had caused a civilization to fade. Something powerful enough to erase entire systems, or at least force a species to disappear. And the automated response was still active, still trying to communicate the danger. The coalition decided to simulate possible scenarios. Using the decoded sequences, they attempted to model what could have caused the fading civilization to send warnings. Was it a natural disaster, a collapsing star, or something more sinister? Some sequences hinted at intelligent action movements that suggested avoidance rather than random destruction. The team began to suspect that whatever had wiped out or forced the civilization to fade might still exist. It was a chilling thought. Despite the fear, the team pressed on. Humanity had already responded with its own message, and now there was a need to understand the full story. The sequences suggested not only the presence of a threat, but also clues about survival signals of escape routes, safe zones, or defensive measures. The researchers realized that the fading civilization had anticipated a future listener. They had prepared instructions, warnings, even guidance, hoping that another intelligent species might survive where they had failed. International teams began to coordinate more closely. Space agencies, observatories, and independent scientists worked together to map the threat. Using patterns in the automated response, they identified a region of space where the danger might originate. It was far beyond any known human reach, but the trajectories and warning sequences suggested movement. Whatever had caused the fading civilization's demise was not static. It could move. It could pursue. It could destroy. The emotional strain was immense. The researchers often went without sleep, driven by the fear that understanding the signal might reveal an impending danger. But curiosity and responsibility outweighed exhaustion. They could not ignore the warning, even if the threat seemed distant. Humanity had been given a rare opportunity to learn from the mistakes of another civilization, to see the consequences of a force beyond comprehension, and to prepare. One night, while reviewing sequences, the first researcher noticed an anomaly that made him freeze. Certain pulses, previously thought to be random variations, now formed a coherent pattern that seemed to target humanity itself. The message was no longer abstract. It had the appearance of a warning specifically for Earth. The fading civilization's automated system had adjusted its response, taking into account the source of the reply. It was as if the distant machine had recognized humanity and was trying to communicate as a C. Critical alert. The team convened immediately. They debated the meaning. Was it a sign of danger approaching Earth? Or was it merely a record, a simulation of what had happened elsewhere? The patterns repeated with urgency, like a heartbeat accelerating under stress. All calculations pointed to the possibility that the threat could move through space, following paths that intersected with human systems in the distant, The small station became the epicenter of global attention. Governments, agencies, and scientists demanded transparency. Humanity had sent a message, and now a response full of warnings, guidance, and potential threat had been detected. The story that had begun with curiosity now became a matter of survival planning. The researchers, once content with discovery, found themselves strategists in a cosmic warning system. They continued decoding the pulses. Some sequences revealed methods of survival, how the fading civilization had attempted to avoid the threat, how they had moved resources, and how they had attempted to communicate across time and space. Other sequences were more terrifying, references to unstoppable forces, intelligent or not, that could erase life across multiple systems. Each new revelation brought awe and dread. Humanity had been fortunate to hear the plea in time, yet the threat loomed like a shadow waiting centuries away. The international coalition proposed sending a second, more detailed message. Humanity would not just respond with greetings and descriptions, but also with understanding, readiness, and questions. They encoded not only information about Earth, but also about humanity's capacity for defense, intelligence, and adaptability. The hope was to establish a dialogue, to learn not only what caused the fading civilization's demise, but also how to avoid it. Themselves, the researchers wrestled with what to include. What could humanity communicate across light years? They debated showing technology, culture, and knowledge. They considered including instructions, maps of the solar system, and even philosophical ideas about life and survival. Every decision carried risk. Sharing too much might expose vulnerabilities. Sharing too little might fail to convey intent. It was a delicate balance. Weeks passed as the message was refined. Each team contributed expertise. Engineers worked on signal strength, mathematicians on encoding, linguists on patterns of communication, and ethicists on the tone. Finally, the message was ready. Unlike the first, it was designed not only to be received, but to be understood in layers. It combined information, emotion, and strategy, conveying humanity's presence while asking critical questions about the threat. The transmission was sent using the most powerful equipment ever assembled for interstellar communication. The first researcher watched as the signals left Earth, pulsing steadily into the cosmos. He imagined the journey through stars and dark voids, hoping that the automated system would recognize the reply, interpret the message correctly, and perhaps provide further guidance. In the weeks following the transmission, humanity waited. The automated response continued, repeating its sequences, some now synchronized with the new message. The faintest hints suggested comprehension. The patterns shifted slightly, as if acknowledging that Earth had sent a reply and understood some of the instructions. For the first time, the researchers sensed interaction, not just observation. Humanity was part of a cosmic dialogue, even if one-sided and delayed by vast distances. Emotionally, the team felt both relief and tension. Relief that humanity had taken its first steps in responding, tension because the threat remained unknown. They understood that the fading civilization had faced forces capable of destroying life. They now had guidance and warnings, but no certainty of timing or proximity. Every calculation, every simulation was a guess. Every decision carried stakes for the distant future of humanity. Despite the fear, hope persisted. Humanity had not only received a plea, but had acted. They had listened, understood, and responded. They had entered a larger story, one that spanned light years and lifetimes. They were no longer isolated on a small planet. They were participants in a galaxy-wide legacy, learning from those who had come before. The first researcher often stared at the night sky, reflecting on the journey. The original signal had been simple yet profound, a plea for help from a civilization fading into the void. Humanity's response had shown intelligence, empathy, and courage. The automated response had revealed warnings, guidance, and the faint hope that life could survive even against forces beyond comprehension. And in that moment, the first researcher understood something deeper. Discovery was not merely knowledge. It was connection, responsibility, and action. Humanity had been touched by voices across the galaxy, and they had answered. The consequences were uncertain, the danger real. Yet the act itself was extraordinary. The researchers and the coalition continued their work, analyzing sequences, refining messages, and preparing for whatever the universe might reveal next. They knew that this was only the beginning. The fading civilization's warning was a reminder that life was fragile, intelligence was rare, and vigilance was essential. Humanity had listened, and humanity had acted. The stars, once distant and silent, now held a story in which humans played a part, and somewhere across the galaxy, a system waited. Its automated signals pulsed steadily, sharing the history, knowledge, and warnings of a civilization that had once been. Now, humanity had joined the conversation. The galaxy had spoken, and for the first time, humans had truly responded.